Hi everyone. My name's Christine Clear, and first of all, I'd like to wish all of you a very, very happy and prosperous new year. I'm recording this on the 2nd of January 2023, so I guess I'm a day late, but it's a bank holiday here in the UK, so I think that counts too. I hope you had a great time over the holiday season, Christmas, if you celebrate Yule, the winter solstice, and over the new year as well. I'd like to thank everyone who supported and watched my videos over the last 12 months. I'm really grateful for all of the kind words that you've sent me over that time and all the support you gave me. So we're here today to take a look at some of the major transits and the themes of the astrology of 2023. In future, I'll probably do maybe one or two videos a month looking at monthly ones, but we're going to kick off with an overview of the whole year because it's another pretty big year in terms of transits and what's happening and what's going on. We've been through some extreme times astrologically over recent years, and those themes are going to continue into 2023 and beyond. But the good news is that there's some major shifts coming up this year that will hopefully be much more positive than some of the experiences we've had since, well, around 2018, really. And especially during and beyond 2020 and the COVID pandemics. So we're going to begin with Jupiter having been in Aries since the 20th December. And as we know, Jupiter represents that the principle of expansion, of success. It wants to grow, it wants to elevate, it wants to uplift, it wants to make things better, bigger, magnify them, make things larger as a whole, I guess. And so in that sense, it wants us, if we use it well, to experience some form of success, abundance, happiness, good fortune, and is very much associated with higher thinking, spirituality, philosophy, liberality, optimism, things like that. Those sorts of ideas and principles, and longer range, broader perspectives than perhaps we wouldn't usually think about. It's in the sign of Aries, and Aries is the sign of the pioneer. It's the sign of the spark of individuality. It wants to take its own path. It wants to make things happen, and while it can be social, it's often a sign that wants to go its own way and take its own path, no matter what. It wants to be the first. It certainly wants to win whenever it can. So with Jupiter in this sign, you could say fortune favors the brave. It's time to claim who you really are. Usually through meeting challenges, and you may even find threatening circumstances, but the optimism of Jupiter may well help you through and see you through them. Aries is ruled by Mars, and we're going to talk about Mars in a little while. And so we'll see how those two kind of work together at the moment as well. Jupiter spent a long time in Pisces because it went retrograde in Pisces, and Jupiter rules Pisces, and Pisces is a water sign, and it's much more ethereal and less focused than Aries. But Jupiter's now going to whiz through Aries, which somehow feels absolutely appropriately positive, whizzing through Aries. So it's time really to break free from any situations that make it impossible for you to truly be yourself, to accept the challenges that you're faced with, even if you're not sure you can meet them. And I think the rule of thumb with transiting Jupiter in Aries is if you think something can't be done, do it anyway. With Jupiter in Aries, clearly the fire signs are going to benefit the most because they're in trine to it. So Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius are probably going to get the best out of it. Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, people with emphasis on Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn may find more pressure to take risks, but there'll also be great opportunities for strong Gemini and Aquarian sign people as well. So I just mentioned Mars, and Mars has been retrograde since August last year, um, which is makes it a very long time for Mars to be in the same sign. But it actually starts to move forward. It stations direct on the 12th of January. It finally begins to move direct again. So Mars in Gemini has been full on all the time. Well, certainly I've experienced it as being full on, even when it was retrograde. It's kind of like trying to do a million things all at the same time, getting distracted, and then sometimes feeling there's a volatility about Mars in Gemini. It's arguments, it's disagreements, it's fibs, lies, the lack of truth, and maybe even manipulation involved there. And that manipulation can spill over into a form of violence. And I guess what I'm thinking of there at the moment is the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And Mars in Gemini, I think, is very much involved in what's happening there. I don't think we know the truth. And it'll be a while before I think we do know the truth of what's happening and what's going on. But while it's been retrograde, we may have taken some opportunities to reflect a little bit on our own lives, and maybe calm down. Although Gemini's got a short span of attention, it's always restless, and so Mars in Gemini increases that restlessness, increases that desire to be doing things, but it doesn't focus very well on what it's doing. It's always forever changing. So, I mean, you're looking at activities that are variable, so variety, sociability, fast, active, moving things. It's great for sport, and so on. Fast talking, and things like that. And we aren't out of it really. It stays in Gemini until March 25th. But at least it's moving forward now. We're kind of going over old ground again now. Well, once March 25th comes along, Mars moves into Cancer, and things change quite dramatically then. So that's Mars. We know Mars is about energetic force, pressing, moving forward, all of those sorts of things. On the 22nd of January, Uranus in Taurus stations direct. It's been moving. Mars, beg your pardon, Uranus and Saturn have been square for quite a long time, almost all the way through 2022, which I've spoken about in other videos. And that's really more or less over now. I mean, we're at the last, if you think in terms of a wide orb around 9-10 degrees, then it's still just about there, but it's really finished. And that's really good news, I think. Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, but continuously only since March 2019. So we've been experiencing Uranus in Taurus for quite a long time already now. Uranus in Taurus was associated historically with things like the Great Depression. So in the 1930s, Uranus transited Taurus, and we had all of those economic and societal instability that was going on there. And I think we can see that happening in the world again today, with all sorts of instability going on. The Saturn-Uranus square has manifested really with the desire for change being held back by a strong traditional Saturn. I've talked about it a lot in my Zoom, so I'll probably not continue to talk about it too much, but there's been conflict between innovation and conservatism with a small c, traditionalism probably is a better word, looking for stability, holding on to what was always there before. Uranus wants to change things, it wants to move wealth around, it wants to distribute more evenly, and so you've got that dichotomy between the two that has been playing out in our worlds, out there in the world. And we may be feeling that in our own lives as well, to a certain extent, depending on signs and how you are reflecting that in your own natal charts. So Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius as well. So that may well mean there's a great deal of significance for Uranus coming up in the future when Pluto moves into Aquarius. I'll talk about that in a little while. Um, and that will change things considerably. We've seen those Saturn Uranus square tensions uh, that I just talked about there. The new versus the authoritarian top down traditions and power, and traditional authority of Saturn, uh, with Uranus saying, okay, I want change, I want freedom, and I'm prepared to go as far as rebellion and revolution to get it if I have to. Uranus can represent the Promethean rebel trickster as well. Uh, so we're looking there at sudden changes, sudden openings and awakenings, inventiveness, creative breakthroughs, and so on and so forth. So that's a long term one, as I'm focusing on most of the time with these long term ones, um, because they're the ones that shape the world that we live in, and it's how we use that and how we shape and how we imagine that future with these outer planets that really will bring about the changes in consciousness and the way we see the world and the way the world reacts to us. I've said it before, I'll say it again, the world is as we dream it, very well-known shamanic saying, and it's absolutely true. So, because we don't actually see reality as it is, we see reality through the mirrors and the perspectives and the prisms of our own understandings, our own attitudes, our own assumptions, and our own beliefs. So it's our positivity to make things happen, to change positively, that helps shape the future. We can shape the future, and that's really important to understand, especially with Uranus and all the opportunities it gives us in Taurus. There's lots of innovation with Uranus in Taurus as well. So we see that with Bitcoin and so on and so forth. Then Saturn enters Pisces on the 7th of March of this year. Now, this is a huge shift and a huge change. The last time Saturn wasn't in one of its own signs, one of the signs it traditionally rules, was in December 2017. Since then, it's been through Capricorn, and that was joined, and then it was joined by Pluto while it was in Capricorn, and we saw COVID arise with Neptune in Pisces at the same time. And then it moved into Aquarius, where it's been more recently. And now on the 7th of March, it's entering Pisces. Saturn takes around 29, 30 years to go around the zodiac. So it spends roughly 2.5 years in each sign. So you can see that it's taken nearly 6 years to get through those two signs. Saturn in its own sign is very, very strong and powerful. And while it manifests slightly differently in Aquarius, where it wants to see who's in and who's out, it creates boundaries and barriers, and then it's a case of who's inside and who's outside, whereas Saturn in Capricorn limits, controls, and keeps us inside the boundaries. So there's been that shift, but now it's moved out of its domicile and into Pisces. So if you think about Saturn being the principles of limit and structure, necessity, authority, responsibility, ambition, time, it's going to have a hard time, I think, in some ways when it moves into Pisces. Saturn contracts, inhibits. So you can say where Jupiter is liberal and magnanimous, who we talked about a little while, Saturn is almost the exact opposite. Saturn wants to be conservative and strict. So where Jupiter uplifts, Saturn wants to oppress. And I think we can have seen those things playing out in the world outside and around us. And it's important to recognize that we need both. You can't have unlimited growth without any restrictions. And I guess modern capitalist world has been very Jupiterian in wanting constant growth, while Saturn imposes maturation on us and limits on what and how we can do it. So, give you an idea about Saturn in Pisces, I did a little bit of research, and these will be approximate dates, but Saturn has been in Pisces. Saturn takes about, well, I've said to her, about 28, 30 years to go around the zodiac. So Saturn in Pisces was there between 1905 and 1908, with a little gap in the middle. And then between 1935 and 1938, and 1964 and 1967, and then 1993 to 1996. So if you look at some of the things that were going on during those times, and I focused really on the most recent ones because they're the ones we're probably going to relate to mostly, but you can see some of those times coincide with the Vietnam War, with racial tension and changes. The 94-96 Labour governments, where socialist policies came into play, where we saw literally the demise of the Tories, and some people were saying then that the Conservative Party was dead and buried. We saw strong economic growth, but at the same time we were seeing wars in Eastern Europe, genocide in Rwanda, but at the same time there we were seeing democratic elections in South Africa. There was a crisis in Iraq, which led to the Iraq War. And there was a great time for the arts, for music, for creativity. So it was the time of The Who, the Stones, the Beatles, Donovan, Jimi Hendrix in the 60s. And then in the 90s, we had Love Is All Around by Wet, 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 Heaven Help Us, the Spice Girls, Oasis, Take That, things like that. So there's a sense of wanting structure with Saturn in Pisces, but not quite being able to get hold of it. So great for that creativity to let the barriers down whilst having a little bit of structure. But it's also about recognizing our own limitations and recognizing others' limitations, and recognizing that it's important not to scapegoat others, to recognize that there are differences, but we are all valid individuals and we all have our own path. So let's try and summarize that a little bit. There's a sense of lack of clarity to me with Saturn in Pisces. It's like a ship that's lost on the ocean, or attempting to build solid foundations on mud and sand. It might work to an extent, but you've got to be very careful about where you're actually building. But it's also a potential for deepening of spiritual practice, or perhaps for some, a rejection of those spiritual practices, of changing completely how they see and work with their spirituality and their philosophy. It certainly can represent authority being swept away on the storms of change, or at least certainly those senses of authority being changed into something that's less harsh than when we saw Saturn in its own signs. I'd suggest this is going to be a time of huge optimism, of hope and a possibility, that creativity. So it's a bit like the flower power era, which coincided with another Saturn in Pisces time. So it's an optimism that isn't necessarily fulfilled. Flower power had, I'm old enough to remember it, had that wonderful sense of complete optimism that we could change the world. And it never quite happened. It's a time of the Beatles, of social change, of creative, artistic change. And one thing that struck me quite strongly is during the 60s, Saturn in Pisces, the time Sir Winston Churchill died. And that really feels to me like a shift there. That's the old order passing away and something new moving in. In mundane terms, you could say Winston Churchill's died and we had the Labour Party of Harold Wilson. Whether that's good, bad or indifferent is entirely up to you, but two totally different perspectives and point of view. So Saturn in Pisces is going to be challenging for people with strong Pisces, Gemini, Virgo or Sagittarius. Lots of rewards for Cancer and Scorpio, I think, and opportunities as well for Taurus and Capricorn here. But obviously, there are lots of ways this can manifest in our own personal charts, and depends an awful lot on what aspects it's bringing out in your own chart, what planets it's aspecting in your own chart. Um, but I'm optimistic. It's going to be chaotic. It's certainly not going to feel as restricted as it has done. Um, may well bring about some more chaos. So it's not going to be smooth sailing, but I think it's a huge positive change that we'll all be very happy to see, I hope. Also in March, 23rd of March, Pluto's enters Aquarius. Now this is huge, absolutely huge. Pluto is the archetype of primordial energy, of evolution, transformational energies. It brings up all sorts of deep, dark secrets that can then compel, empower, overwhelm, and transform. It can destroy and it can resurrect. It can make big things small and small things big. You know, the splitting of the atom to create the atom bomb and so on. It's huge. Um, Pluto doesn't stay in Aquarius very long this time. It dips its toe in, if you like, for a few months, and then goes back into Capricorn, where it's been for well, the last 20 odd years. And then we'll move back into Aquarius in January 2024 and stays there until 2044. So if you're of a certain age, we're going to live the rest of our lives with Pluto in Aquarius. For you youngsters, this is going to be an amazing time, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out at the other end of this. Pluto is immensely powerful. It's that depth and intensity, as I've said already. It's cycles of death and rebirth, upheaval, breakdown, decay, and so on. And we've been experiencing that in Capricorn for a long time. So what you've been seeing here, I think, is the reinforcement of those Saturnian energies within the Capricorn sign of Capricorn. So holding on to those traditions that we were talking about earlier on, the traditional way of doing things has been really, really strong with Pluto in Capricorn. And at the same time wanting that change and revolution. So we've been seeing the death knells of a way of life that no longer works. Whether that be a change in how we're governed in democracy or in economics and capitalism, I can't tell you. But again, I've gone back. Let's the best way and the only way really you could say what's going to happen is to look back over periods of time to see when Pluto was in Aquarius in the past. So I've gone right the way back to 1307 because that doesn't happen very, very often. So we had Pluto in Aquarius between March 1307 and November 1308. And then again between 1532 and 1553. And then the last time it was there was between 1777 and 1798. So these are some of the events. I did a quick search around what was going on at those times. Obviously, the further back you go, the less detail there is, and it's more focused on conflict and so on. So maybe that's something that will come out here. Pluto was also in Aquarius in the late 1280s. So there was the Welsh Rebellion in 1286-87, Pluto in Aquarius. From 1307 onwards, for a long time, there was a war-torn Europe, torn apart by wars between nations all over Europe. And in the UK, well, what's now the UK, between England and Scotland, there was the Scottish War of Independence that dragged on for a long time. 1532 onwards, we have Henry VIII and political and state chaos with what he was doing. We also had raging inflation because he was playing around with the currency back in those days. I actually saw a documentary that mentioned this last night, so I wasn't going to talk about this. I didn't even know about it, but Henry VIII started to mix copper with his silver coins. Once upon a time, a pound of silver was a pound coin, or was the weight of the coin. And he decided to cut it with copper, and that led to raging inflation and also to foreign merchants refusing to take English coin, creating all sorts of chaos with trade with Europe. So there was also, of course, the establishment of the Church of England, the breaking with the Catholic Church. There was religious revolution, not just here, but in Europe as well, where Protestantism was taking hold. But here we had the persecution of the Catholics with the establishment of that Church of England. And then we had war with France. There was the dissolution of the monasteries. And one particular thing caught my eye here, which having been born in Reading, and I don't think Reading gets the Reading Abbey is beautiful. If you get the chance, go there. Not many people go there. They've spent a lot of money making it much more attractive and accessible. In 1539, Reading Abbey was suppressed, and the abbot of Reading Abbey, Hugh Cook Farringdon, was indicted and hanged, drawn and quartered for treason there. Then in the 1770s, we have the American Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution begins with steam power. There's the invention of the spinning mule, revolutionizing cotton and textile industries. There's the invention of the rolling steel mill. There's the trade in the Far East with the East India Company that was essentially a government on its own. It ran India with the government and the sovereignty just allowing it to do it, really. There was then Pitt the Younger was elected, bringing revolutionary politics for the time that he was in charge of Parliament and leader of the parties. There was religious dissent. There was riots against new technology. There was also the ending of the slave trade. There was the French Revolution, the French Revolutionary Wars with Britain and others. And there was Britain supporting revolution in Haiti against French slavery. And there was the beginning of the Anglo-Spanish War. So looking at that, I think we can say there's almost certainly and very likely to be things like revolution again over this 20-year period. There's going to be technical advances. There's going to be robotics. There's the invention, the increased availability of AI, scientific advances or changes. There's going to be those things like there's the ability to put little microchips in people now that to help with disabilities, so it helps them to be much more able-bodied. But how far will that go? There's an ending of the old order. There's struggle, change, transformation, and societal changes alongside personal evolutionary growth and change. It's very much about the collective and the personal, with the personal becoming the collective and how that plays out. It's an opportunity for the creation of a new order of society, a new creation of a new sense of spirituality and philosophy. And it's the chance to become more than we are now. It's a chance, in New Age terminology, to, I guess, to ascend to a higher vibration, a higher level, however you see it. You've got all those things, as well as the fact that there is going to be nations in rebellion and nations in transition as we move from the old paradigm into a new paradigm that really none of us can fully understand yet, because we are and have been going through these changes for a long time. When you're in the middle of it, you don't realize what's happening around you. After the Pluto in Capricorn transits, I think we're destined now to deconstruct existing societal structures, and a time to reinvent our societies and our spirituality and our understandings. And this is a global thing, as well as a personal thing. There's going to be huge insights for almost all of the signs, depending on where this falls in your chart. But this is going to be, I would say, subtle, but it's going to be something that is deeply empowering, that may well completely disrupt lives for a period of time for some of us. but others will sail through it without any problems whatsoever. Um, Society, on the other hand, over these next 20 years, are going to see huge changes. I mean, this is absolutely massive. And it continues after 2023. Like I say, this is there till 2044. Saturn's going to move signs. Uranus is going to move signs over that period of time. And Jupiter is going to move signs every year. So you've got all of those changes going on at the same time. And it's going to be fascinating. And I actually like plutonium, the Pluto energies most of the time. And it's created huge changes in my life. Uh, and if we work with it, it's positive and it's wonderful. If we fight against it, there's inevitability about Pluto. Pluto is remorseless. So if we fight against it, it's just going to make it harder. So it's best to embrace these changes and work with them as well as we can. Yeah, there's going to be ethical issues, certainly with AI and robots and so on and so forth. You know, when is it right to use AI? When is it right to use robotics? When is it right to chip human beings? Because that's what's going to happen in the future. You know, what is it to be human? What is it to be a robot? And those questions will need answering over the next 20 odd years. So anyway, lots to think about there. March again, you can see March is a huge shift after that relatively quiet start to the year. Relatively quiet because there'll be moments that aren't as quiet, but March is this huge dynamic shift in energies. From the end of March onwards, we're going to see these changes begin to manifest. So 25th of March, Mars enters Cancer. So it's the first time Mars has changed sign since August 2022. I did talk about it a little bit earlier. And very briefly, Mars in Cancer isn't very, very happy. This is kind of an anomaly because the other planets move much, much quicker, much slower, than Mars, and Mars will go through Cancer much quicker than it did with Gemini. Mars isn't very dispassionate about things. Cancer is emotional. So Mars will want to do things, but it won't really know how to do it. It's going to be all at sea. So maybe it's a good time to focus on domestic matters, family matters, deal with things that need courage and decisive action around your children or your home. You know, good time to redecorate the lounge. And hopefully do a decent job about it. That's all I'm really going to say about Mars in Cancer. I'll talk more about it probably in future videos, but not right now. Now, on the 1st of May, Pluto stations retrograde. As I said earlier, it's going to move back into Capricorn. And on the 1st of May, Pluto in Aquarius stations retrograde and starts to move back towards Capricorn. On the 16th of May, Jupiter enters Taurus, so it's there now in the same sign as Uranus. It's co-present, as they say, in the same sign. And in traditional astrology, that would make an aspect on its own, even if they were quite a long way away. So Jupiter, we've spoken about, the urge to grow, to explore, to seek meaning, wants to increase things. It doesn't always increase the right things, but in Taurus, it'll probably want to increase prosperity, security, and pleasure. Hopefully it'll be a bit more egalitarian in terms of how it increases the prosperity, because in Pluto we've seen the rich get super rich and the poor get super poor, which hasn't really been great. Jupiter in Taurus is probably going to be more about steady growth rather than sudden and dramatic growth, although we may find that happens as well. There's a sense here of Jupiter in Taurus about earthy blessings, earthly wealth, earthly bounty, earthly security, and an earthiness about Taurus here. Physical pleasures. there's a sense of conservatism with Taurus as well. So it may find that it wants to hold on to more of the way we've been doing things before, whereas Uranus in the same sign of Taurus is going to want things to change. So there may be an unwillingness to confront the needed change. And there may be a sense of having to tear down some things we take for granted and have never really questioned before. Um, Jupiter in Taurus alongside Uranus may say, just because we've been doing something a certain way, doesn't mean there isn't a better way of doing it. And it may be something we've been doing for a very, very long time in our lives and also in the outer world. So maybe a time to rethink some entrenched attitudes that we have personally, um, uh, things that are outmoded, inconvenient, and harmful to us, and commit to a more Jupiterian way of doing things. So, education, something that requires patience and stamina. Um, Look after your allotment, return to nature, spend time in nature, like a flock of sheep, something like that. There aren't many outer planet aspects this year, which is probably good news because we've had plenty of those causing all sorts of strife and disruption. The one significant this year between the outer planets is on the 18th of May when Jupiter squares Pluto. It's actually going to be relatively short-lived for an outer planet one. Jupiter's moving quite fast at the time it happens. So that's an interesting thing. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad, if you like. There's no such thing as a bad aspect. It's how we use it and how we use those potentials. And I think Jupiter here is going to bring about a deep striving for some form of excellence, achievement, expansion, and success. Maybe it'll bring about some changes in terms of how we fund our public services, how we access wealth, how we access power. Certainly in our own lives, there's probably going to be the possibility and potential here for transformation to elevate our consciousness, to understand what's happening around us and to us, and use that transformation of energy in a positive way. I can see this being a time of great artistic power, intellectual and cultural influences. There's a great confidence about this, and there's a real strong possibility with that Pluto there. There's going to be some lasting potential coming from it. On the other side, of course, we may become arrogant, snobbish, pompous, a sense of superiority might manifest as well if we jump into the energies from a negative point of view. So use that time over those few weeks where they're square there, to use that tension, because the square is always a tense aspect. Use that tension to create something that's positive and lasting in your life. So moving on then, on the 11th of June, Pluto returns into Capricorn. So we've had that short period of time of Pluto in Aquarius, that little taster of what the next 20 years will be like before Pluto moves back into Capricorn. And dare I say, we're back under the thumb again. It won't necessarily feel like that. Remember, Pluto is slow and remorseless. This isn't a sudden, snap of the fingers and something's changed. It's just that energy that's constantly moving through everything. But it does move back into Capricorn and stays there and then until January 2024, when it finally moves into Aquarius for another 20 years. So for a very long time then. A few changes in direction now. I won't dwell on these too much, but 17th of June, Saturn stations retrograde, so we'll be going back over themes again. It stays in Pisces, it doesn't come out of Pisces, so it's giving us kind of a second chance to review what we're doing with Saturn in Pisces energies. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all. And on the 30th of June, Neptune, who I don't think we've spoken about at all, stations retrograde. Neptune's been in Pisces for what feels like forever. Um, Neptune dissolves, and it's the modern ruler of Pisces. So Pisces is this dissolving ocean of oneness, and Neptune is almost the same thing. You know, it's the dream. It's everything is accessible, but everything is dreamlike and wishy-washy and so on. Can't quite focus on anything. It's like walking through the mist. You can't quite see where you're going, but it's somehow beautiful. It's that beautiful transcendence and an ideal reality of watercolored wonderfulness, of the imagination of our spirituality where we can touch the gods. And it's turning retrograde in Pisces. Happens relatively regularly. So again, just something to be aware of. We've had Neptune in Pisces for a long time. We're almost used to it now. The transcendent, spiritual, the ideal, the symbolic, the imaginative, all of those things Neptune in Pisces. But it's kind of almost been lost so much because of the strength of Saturn and of Pluto and those Capricornian and Aquarian energies. There's been this subtone of Neptune there, the transcendence energy, the dissolution energy, the fantasies, the escapism, the possibilities, the mysticism of Neptune in Pisces has been there all the time, and maybe going retrograde and give us another chance to look at it with Pluto moving eventually into Aquarius. We may find those energies and those feelings, that melted ecstasy coming through much more clearly. The healing energies, the pure energies of Neptune in Pisces, a mystical union of love and transcendent beauty, artistic possibilities is there. In July, the nodes of the moon move from Taurus Scorpio axis to the Aries Libra axis. Now the eclipses, and that's where the eclipses are. When the moon and the sun are close to the node, that's when we get our eclipses. I won't go through the technical reasons why that is, but that's what happens. We only get eclipses when they're very, very close to the nodes of the moon. So effectively they cross paths. So the actual movement of the nodes from Taurus to Scorpio to Aries Libra changes where the eclipses will happen. Although the April the 20th solar eclipse is already in Aries. It's 29 degrees 50 minutes of Aries, so just 10 minutes into Aries, because the nodes move backwards through the sky. Then the lunar eclipse on the 5th of May is still in Scorpio, and the solar eclipse on the 14th of October is back in Libra. And the lunar eclipse of the 28th of October is back in Taurus too. But after that, we'll start to see there's eclipses constantly in Aries, Libra. So the nodes and the full and dark moon or new moon, they're the beginnings and endings of cycles. They're new cycles, the ending of cycles, and they bring us opportunities and challenges, focusing on the individual and on relationships now. Aries is the individual and relationships is Libra. So that's a very broad brushstroke sense of where we're moving there. There's almost echoing the Pluto energies moving into Aquarius, the individual being subsumed into the collective, and yet remaining the individual. Then on the 23rd of July, I will mention Venus here. Venus stations retrograde in Leo, so it's there a little while. And Venus in Leo wants glamour, luxury, excitement. She wants to look fabulous. This is a time for splurging on having fun and enjoying yourself, showing off. So if you've got a strong Leo there, then just be aware that Venus is there and is moving retrograde in July, the end of July. I'm just going to end with a few more changes in direction. I'm not going to talk long about them because we've talked about the planets already, but on the 29th of August, Uranus will station retrograde in Taurus. On the 4th of September, Jupiter will station retrograde. And also on the 4th of September, Venus stations direct. So Jupiter and Venus change directions on the same day. That'll be interesting. On the 11th of October, Pluto stations direct and starts its movement again back towards Aquarius. And on the 4th of November, Saturn stations direct. So some shifts in direction and energies again there. So those are a very, very brief overview of the major transits that are going to be going on this year, the major energies that are going to be going on. Those outer planets, Uranus, Pluto, certainly Saturn, Jupiter to a degree, Neptune, are all making the potential for us to be able to grow and find a different way of doing things, of making manifest something that is lasting and a sense of equality. I think there's a revolution in the air. Whether it's peaceful or not, I can't tell you. But certainly the next 20 years are going to be some ride. And the next few years, we're still right in the midst of all these changes. And so people ask me, well, when's things going to get better? Well, they're getting better, but we're in the middle of epochal times, and we continue to be in the middle of transformative epochal times, and it gives us huge opportunities to be the change that we want to see. I keep saying this over and over again, but we have to be the change. We manifest what it is we dream and what it is we wish for and what it is we do. We have the opportunity with Pluto in Aquarius to become our own authority for the good of the community, whatever that community may be to you. So those of us with a spiritual perspective, a higher philosophical perspective, have the opportunity now and continue to have the opportunity to create something better, a society that's better for all, and to awaken or reawaken our understandings of the things beyond our physical world. Those of you that have worked with me probably have a better idea of what I'm talking about than those of you that have never worked with me. But these are golden opportunities. They are not without risk. So really all I'm saying is be aware, practice mindfulness, be aware of what's happening around you and your reaction to everything that you say and you do. For now, I think that's probably enough. And I hope you have a wonderful 2023. And I'll be back again soon with more detailed reviews of shorter periods of time, because this is a big rush through the next 12 months and beyond. So anyway, take care. Thanks for watching. Lovely to see you all.